Hi, friends. I want to talk to you about Paul's thorn in the flesh, and I'm going to bring up scripture and to make my points clear. And so, first, what I want to do is I want to bring up the actual scripture from Corinthians, Second Corinthians. It's Second Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10, where Paul is writing. And I want to read these scriptures and then pull up supporting scriptures to make my point about what I believe it is. And there are two basic teachings about Paul's thorn, and one is that the thorn in his flesh was persecution from Jews, and another teaching, which is also actually common, is that it was something demonic and an actual problem with his flesh, weakness and infirmity. And that's actually what I believe. I believe that latter one, that it's a weakness in his flesh and it was demonic. And I'm going to show you clear evidence as to why it was. And so let me read this text real quick. And lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing I sought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. And he said unto me, My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Now, this is out of the King James Version. I usually read the Peshitta. Well, actually, I read a lot of versions, but I commonly read the Peshitta, which is an Aramaic translation. But for the sake of video, so that I can copy and paste and pull up scripture quickly, I use the King James or other versions from the Bible Gateway. And that's what this is from. I took a screenshot of the King James Version. So, but let me just quickly go through, before pulling up some supporting scripture and other things I want to show you, I want to just mention a few things where just in the context of this portion of scripture alone, it doesn't make sense that it would be persecution from Jews. And in verse 7, we see the words, messenger of Satan. And now let me back up. Thorn in the flesh, that phrase thorn in the flesh is a major reason why some people believe that it's persecution from the Jews, and they cite Old Testament scripture, which I'm going to bring up also and make points on that. But then the words right after that, in verse 7, the messenger of Satan. So just without supporting text elsewhere, I just want to mention that this phrase, messenger of Satan, is not usually the language that is used when it's speaking of people. That's usually speaking of a spirit being. So that language is not. It's just that's not the way. It's not the type of language that's used. I hope you understand it. It's not the type of language that's used when a person, a human being, is being spoken of. And verse 8, for this thing I sought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. And again, the language here is not language that is used when speaking of people. It says for this thing. People are not referred to as a thing. And then it says that it might depart from me. Again, people are not referred to as its. So just here in this text, without using supporting text, it doesn't make sense that it would be people, persecution from the Jews. All right, let me go on to verse 9. And he said unto me, My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Let me stop right there. And so it says weakness. The word weakness is used. And let me go on to the next sentence, because another word is used in place of weakness, which it helps you understand what is meant by weakness. And so the second sentence in verse 9, most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities. So he's relating the word infirmities with the word weakness. He's saying, you get it? He's saying the same thing there. It's like saying, most gladly, therefore, will I glory in my weaknesses. But he's saying that most clearly, therefore, will I glory in my infirmities. He's replacing the word weakness with the word infirmities to tell you the weakness that he's referring to is infirmity. You get that? That's clear. That's a type of language that is used by people in just normal everyday conversation. They'll use different words to make their point about a certain word. They break up their vocabulary, in other words, to help you to understand the definition of the words he's using. So let me continue on with that sentence, and I'll read it again. Most clearly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Okay, and then in verse 10, therefore I take pleasure in infirmities or weaknesses, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions. And let me stop right there. There's that word persecutions that the one teaching says it's persecution of the Jews. But why would, if it was persecution from the Jews, why does Paul use two different words here? He's basically giving a list here in verse 10 of things that come against him. All right, infirmities, reproaches, necessities, persecutions, in distresses. So he gives you a list of four things that come against him. No, five things that come against him. In other words, five different things. So the infirmities, which would be weaknesses, is different than the persecutions. So he's not speaking. So that's just from the context alone here. There's a lot of evidence right here that it's not persecution from the Jews. And so let me pull up. Let me knock this scripture down, bring this down, and then pull up another scripture now in supporting scriptures. Let me see. Thorns in the Old Testament. All right, here we go. So here's three scriptures from the Old Testament that speak of the thorns in the flesh. And I want to make a clear point about this that I think a lot of people overlook. Numbers 33:55. But if ye will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those which ye let remain of them shall be pricks in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and shall vex you in the land wherein you dwell. Now, this is, in fact, let me read the other two before I make my points, because it's a common point from all three of these scripture verses, these portions of the scripture. Joshua 23:13 says, know for certainty that the Lord your God will no more drive out any of these nations from before you, but they shall be snares and traps unto you, and scourges in your sides, and thorns in your eyes, until ye perish from off this good land which the Lord your God has given you. In Judges 2:3, wherefore I said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be snares unto you. Now, the point I'm making about these verses is that these thorns coming against the people of Israel were coming against them because of their disobedience. Paul was not disobedient. He did not have a thorn in his flesh because of disobedience. Paul was an obedient servant of the Lord. In these scriptures from the Old Testament, which are used to support that teaching that Paul's thorn in the flesh was persecution, it doesn't line up because of that reason. These scriptures are making the point clear that the Israelites were disobedient, and so the people that were coming against them because of their disobedience. And so it doesn't line up with Paul's situation. He wasn't being disobedient. He had great revelations, and God was allowing this thorn in the flesh to keep him from being proud. Okay? And so it's just something that people never mention when they use those scriptures to support that teaching that it was persecution. Now let me use this scripture. This word weakness that is used in the text that Paul says is translated from the Greek text, from the Greek word asthenia, and it means, you can see here, it means weakness, frailty. Okay, or you can see short definition. It says want of strength, weakness, illness. definition is want of strength, weakness, illness, suffering, calamity, frailty. So the word is commonly used to refer to something that's an actual weakness or sickness or something in the flesh, and not it has nothing to do with persecution. And that's the word that's used in the text. And all right, so let me make sure I read all that I wanted to read from that. Yeah, that's it. So it's talking about a weakness in the flesh, and that's the see one of the problems with the other teaching is that it's taught that way because the people that teach it that way do not want to support the possibility that a believer can have a weakness, and it's just that's so wrong. I mean, so many people have weaknesses in their flesh. The Bible is clear: the flesh is weak. It teaches that, and that applies in several ways. That scripture that says the flesh is weak. It means two things. It means that the flesh is weak, meaning that sin lives in the flesh, and the carnal nature is in the flesh, and there's no fixing the flesh. It's corrupt, and so it's weak. But it also means that it's weak in the sense that it's decaying, which is really a close definition of the weakness from sin. I mean, it's decaying. The flesh is decaying. It's weak in that sense, and so we're prone to sickness. We're prone to disease. We're prone to weakness in these areas, and so it's not surprising. It's not a big deal that Paul had a weakness that wasn't getting healed or that he had to put up with. It's just something that God allows, and there are so many people, that well-known ministers that had weaknesses, great ministers that when they died with a weakness in their flesh or some kind of disease or sickness that got the better of them because of the weakness of the flesh, not because they had sin in their lives, but because of the weakness of the flesh, and the fact that the body is decaying. We're not this. We get a new body at the end. We have to deal. We have to put up with this body, this weak body, as we're going through life, and that's another reason why we're told to walk in the Spirit, because of the weakness of the flesh. And so let me pull up another word, messenger. This word messenger is also a big word that's used in the text of Corinthians, where the word says a messenger of Satan, thorns in the flesh, a messenger of Satan. And this word messenger is translated from the Greek word angelos, which is angel. Now it could mean a person. It could definitely mean a person, but it's used mostly to mean an angel, a spiritual being. And in this particular situation, it's a messenger of Satan, which means it's a demon. Okay, and that's the main way that it's used. It's used, in fact, you can see at the bottom here, angelos is used 176 times in the New Testament, usually of heavenly angels. But only the context determines whether a human or celestial messenger is intended. So the context matters. And I believe it's pretty clear that the context, from what I've shown you, is that of a spirit being, from all the points I've made. And so I believe it's very clear from this. There's very little evidence that it was persecution. That is taught mainly because of the doctrinal belief that no demon has a right to stay in a believer, and I agree, for the most part it does not. We have authority to cast out demons, and Jesus cast out all demons. But at the same time, I've always been one to believe that there's a sovereignty to the Lord's actions, and that the Lord determines what He's going to do. And this is just one of those situations where it's the sovereignty of God, where God allowed it. God allows things to occur. And in fact, there's other evidence of that throughout Scripture. We have, for instance, the woman that was bent over for 18 long years. She was a daughter of Abraham, and she had to she had to put up with that demon that kept her bent over for 18 long years until Jesus healed her. So it was allowed. So even though that was a time before Pentecost and before the people were born again, nevertheless, she was still a believer, and she had to put up with that until the time came. And then also the man born blind, he had to go 40 years. Neither he didn't sin, and neither did his parents sin, but yet he had to go 40 years until the glory of God could be displayed in his life to get his sight back. So there's a sovereignty of God that's involved in all of what goes on in life. And this is one of those situations with Paul that God allowed this to happen, and it was meant to keep him from being proud. And Jesus said, "My grace is sufficient for thee, for my power is made perfect in weakness." And so this is a weakness. When you have a weakness, and it's a demon taking advantage of Paul's weakness. And Jesus, in fact, Jesus, in terms of persecution from people, Jesus was constantly. Paul went through a whole lot. He was stoned. He was shipwrecked. He was whipped, given a 40 lashes minus one, I think 5 times. But nevertheless, the Lord delivered him from all the persecutors, and but yet this remained with him. And Paul asked for it to be taken away 3 times, and it wasn't. And so that's another little point also. So I believe it's pretty clear. And as I and so like there are many people I believe that will not be happy with this, but that's okay. You can believe what you want to believe. This is what I believe. I think it's very clear. And so I believe it will also keep you from discouragement if you understand what goes on, and what can really occur, and what the atonement provided. Jesus' atonement provided so many great things, and I certainly don't want to diminish the power of his atonement in the finished works of the cross, but this is what I see clearly in Scripture, and I believe I back it up. So I hope it's helped you, and I'll see you guys next time.